Huge news is coming in for Alec Baldwin this week. Hi everybody, it's Harvard lawyer Lee. Alec Baldwin has won round one in the case against him for the shooting death of Halyna Hutchins. The prosecution is dropping the firearms enhancement, and that means Baldwin is no longer facing a mandatory 5 years in prison for using a gun in involuntary manslaughter. And it makes it far likelier that Alec Baldwin and the prosecution can strike a plea deal. Let's talk about what charges got dropped, why they were dropped, and what that means for Alec Baldwin. Now, you probably know the backstory of what happened on December 2nd, 2021. They were doing rehearsals for filming the movie Rust on a set in New Mexico, and Alec Baldwin's character is going to be using a gun to make it look realistic. They're using a real gun, but obviously it's supposed to be unloaded. And the assistant director, David Halls, hands Baldwin a gun that everyone thinks is unloaded, tells Baldwin, according to Baldwin, that it is not loaded. Alec Baldwin has the pistol pointed in the direction of cinematographer Halyna Hutchins, and the gun goes off. It kills Halyna and wounds director Joel Souza. Now, here's what Alec Baldwin was charged with. He was charged with involuntary manslaughter, which in legal jargon is manslaughter committed in the commission of an unlawful act not amounting to a felony, or in the commission of a lawful act which might produce death in an unlawful manner or without due caution and circumspection. It is a fourth-degree felony that carries up to 18 months in jail and a $5,000 fine. Now, the prosecution also added a firearm enhancement charge that would carry a potential 5-year jail kicker for involuntary manslaughter by negligent use of a firearm. In other words, involuntary manslaughter, and the way you committed the manslaughter was using a gun negligently. The 5-year enhancement is mandatory. Baldwin had filed a motion that said it was unconstitutional to apply this enhancement to him because that statute wasn't in effect on the date of the shooting. The fact that the statute was not in effect is not a 100% sure winner if the legislature was simply changing the penalty for something that was already against the law. But for sure, it would have been a very serious fight in the trial court and then on appeal. So why did the prosecution drop it? The spokesperson for the DA said, in order to avoid further litigious distractions by Mr. Baldwin and his attorneys. But that statement doesn't really answer all of the questions about why it may have been dropped. Here are 4 reasons I think they may have dropped these charges. First, they may have believed Baldwin was right, and they really couldn't charge him given the enhancement was not in effect at the time of the shooting. And then second, they may have believed that the cost of the appeals in time and effort of the attorneys wasn't worth it. Let's face it, Baldwin has the best lawyers that money can buy, so this would be an expensive fight. It would go all the way through the appeals court. And maybe they just decided it wasn't worth it. Third, they may have been worried that Baldwin's team would do what's called make bad law. In other words, by fighting the statute, Baldwin would get the statute overturned or weakened, and then perhaps the prosecution couldn't use it for other people. And the fourth reason I think they may have dropped it is they may have been thinking about the fact that it would be very hard to offer a plea deal that would entice Baldwin without looking like they were caving. Probation or 1 month served plus probation might look like the prosecution was showing favoritism to Baldwin. But if the maximum he could get is 18 months, then negotiating a plea deal might actually be within reach. Whatever the reason the prosecution dropped it for Baldwin, they also dropped the 5-year enhancement charge for the armorer on the film set, Halyna Gutierrez-Reed. In some ways, there was a better argument for bringing charges against Gutierrez-Reed than Baldwin in the first place, because she was at least the person charged with making sure the firearms were not live. Baldwin had hired someone to handle that part for him. But the prosecution says that Baldwin skipped the mandatory firearm safety training for the film. He was supposed to get a private hour-long safety session, but he only attended for half an hour and talked on his cell phone during the session. I'm sure Baldwin felt like the safety lesson was a waste of time, given that he'd hired someone to be sure the gun was not loaded with live rounds and to tell him that. every time he touched it. But of course, Baldwin is the one who shot the gun. So if the prosecution charged Gutierrez Reed and not Baldwin, the prosecution definitely would have been accused of favoring Baldwin because he's famous. So what do you think? Was this a move in the right direction by the prosecution? Do you think they ought to drop the charges altogether? Like the video, please, and subscribe for more breaking legal news. We're covering the Murdaugh trial live every night at 7, so I'll see you tonight.